On August 19th, 1944, at the Wehrmacht headquarters in East Prussia, General Oberst Alfred Jodl sat with his staff, reviewing intelligence from the rapidly collapsing Western Front. Allied forces had advanced deep into France, but German analysts believed their momentum was about to break. Their calculations seemed unshakable. Patton's spearheading Third Army was now over 400 miles from the Normandy supply beaches. No army, they thought, could sustain such a pace without exhausting its logistics. German military doctrine was built on decades of experience. They knew the brutal arithmetic of mechanized warfare. An armored division consumed around 150,000 gallons of fuel daily during an advance. With supply lines stretched so thin, they predicted that Patton's forces would be immobilized within days, perhaps even hours. This pause, they believed, would give the Wehrmacht precious time to regroup along the Simon and establish a defensive line to hold through the winter. But their intelligence had overlooked a critical factor. Just 125 miles away, nearly 6,000 American trucks were already moving eastward in endless convoys, headlights blazing against the night, defying every traditional military precaution. These trucks were hauling over 12,000 tons of fuel, ammunition, and supplies every 24 hours. This was the beginning of the Red Ball Express, a logistical operation so daring that German military science had never imagined it possible. Within 3 days, Patton's immobilized tanks would punch through German defenses along the Seine. Within a week, Paris would be liberated. Within a month, Allied forces would be at Germany's border. The German High Command's confidence in American logistical failure came from their own painful experience. Blitzkrieg had revolutionized warfare, but even their most successful campaigns had stalled when supply lines overstretched. In Russia, German advances had faltered not because of Soviet resistance at first, but because they simply couldn't move supplies fast enough across vast distances. Trucks broke down on rough Russian roads, 80% of transport still relied on horses, and incompatible railway gauges left stockpiles hundreds of miles behind the front. In July 1944, General der Panzertruppe Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz summarized their thinking perfectly. The Americans faced the same logistical impossibility we faced in Russia. Their machines require fuel, ammunition, parts. They advanced 400 miles in 30 days. History teaches what comes next: paralysis. German intelligence meticulously tracked Allied consumption rates. A Sherman tank guzzled half a mile per gallon on roads, far worse cross-country. Infantry divisions required 700 tons of daily supplies, armored divisions needed 1,000. Patton commanded 12 divisions spread across a 60-mile front. That meant moving 12,000 tons of material every day over shattered French roads and bridges the Germans had wrecked during their retreat. To them, it seemed like an engineering impossibility. On August 20th, General Major Siegfried Westphal calculated that even if the Americans somehow had unlimited trucks, perfect roads, and zero mechanical failures, conditions he deemed absurd, they still couldn't sustain Patton's advance beyond 48 hours. "Physical laws cannot be violated," he wrote. "Not even by American industry." August 25th, 1944. In a requisitioned French château near Le Mans, Lieutenant Colonel Loren Ayres of the U.S. Motor Transport Service faced a tense room of skeptical officers. Charts and fuel tables covered the walls. The numbers were grim. Patton's Third Army was burning through supplies at a pace no existing logistics system could match. Rail transport was too slow, convoys were scattered, depots were overwhelmed. If nothing changed, the entire advance would grind to a halt. Ayres stepped forward and delivered a radical plan. "Gentlemen, we're going to build a one-way highway from Cherbourg to the front. Trucks will run 20 hours a day. No stops except for fuel and emergencies. We will move at least 12,500 tons daily. No excuses, no delays. The idea drew on railway terminology. In American railroading, a Red Ball freight was a top priority express shipment that moved without interruption. Ayres proposed to apply the same principle to trucks. His team would create two parallel highways, one for loaded vehicles heading to the front, one for empty trucks returning. Convoys would run around the clock, headlights blazing even at night, abandoning blackout discipline entirely. To German officers, such an idea would have seemed suicidal. Convoys with headlights on were perfect targets for air raids. Continuous columns, without spacing, risked massive pileups if one truck broke down, and the required scale seemed impossible. 140 truck companies, nearly 6,000 vehicles, operating at 90% availability with 5-minute convoy intervals and average speeds of 35 miles per hour. But within 36 hours, the impossible became operational reality. On August 26th, drivers from the 3,916th Quartermaster Truck Company climbed into their olive-drab GMC CCKW 2.5-9 trucks, nicknamed Deuce and a Halves, loaded with artillery shells for Patton's guns. Their destination, the rapidly moving front, over 300 miles away. The demographics of these drivers would have stunned Nazi racial theorists. Of the 23,000 men who would operate the Red Ball Express, about 75% were African American soldiers serving in a segregated army. Denied equal rights back home, these men now held Patton's advance in their hands. Within hours, they forged their own culture, painting slogans on trucks like Patton's Blood Bank, Detroit to Berlin Express, and Hitler, Here We Come. They developed their own unwritten traffic laws, too. Slower trucks immediately pulled aside. Broken-down vehicles were pushed into ditches to keep the line moving. Anything under 20 miles per hour was treated as a roadblock. Speed and flow were everything. By August 28th, German reconnaissance units started reporting strange and alarming sightings. From hilltop observation posts, they saw endless streams of American trucks moving day and night without blackout discipline. Headlights stretched like glowing rivers across the countryside, lines of vehicles visible for 20 kilometers at a time. Reports estimated up to 1,000 vehicles per hour. To German officers, it was madness. To the Allies, it was logistics unleashed. Once the Red Ball Express began rolling, it became a living, breathing machine, one that operated with speed, volume, and improvisation, unlike anything the Germans had ever witnessed. What had started as a desperate plan in a French chateau quickly turned into the most aggressive logistics operation of the European War. In its first week alone, August 25th, 31, 1944, the Red Ball Express delivered 89,939 tons of supplies, a daily average of 12,848 tons, across a round-trip distance of 686 miles, using 5,958 trucks, each making 1.5 trips daily, burning 300,000 gallons of fuel per day just to keep itself running. German intelligence analysts captured these figures and dismissed them as American propaganda. The numbers simply didn't fit within their understanding of logistics, but they were real, and they were increasing. By September 5th, the Red Ball had established a rhythm so powerful that German officers, still relying on horse-drawn wagons for 80% of their transport, couldn't comprehend it. Convoys departed every 5 minutes from the western terminus. Each convoy averaged 67 vehicles, carrying 7 tons each. The time to cover 350 miles one way averaged 14 hours, with just 2 hours of turnaround time at each end. At any given moment, roughly 5,000 trucks were on the road. The Red Ball Express functioned like a moving factory. Around 1,800 trucks broke down daily, a number that would have crippled any conventional army. But the Americans didn't treat breakdowns as setbacks. They treated them like expected production waste. Mobile maintenance units were stationed every 50 miles. Mechanics developed a ruthless triage system: 15 minutes to fix it or push it off the road. Cannibalize parts from vehicles deemed beyond repair. Swap engines in 45 minutes using mobile cranes. Tow or ditch anything that couldn't be fixed fast. This aggressive, decentralized approach shocked German logisticians, who followed strict maintenance schedules and centralized control. The Americans, by contrast, embraced controlled chaos. And it worked. Whenever the designated red ball routes clogged, drivers created alternate paths on the fly, commandeered French buses to move personnel, freeing trucks for cargo, repainted captured German vehicles and pressed them into service, built bypass roads around destroyed bridges using rubble and bulldozers, turned rural lanes into supply highways overnight. To the Germans observing this, it looked like disorganized madness. But out of that apparent disorder came astonishing efficiency. The Americans prioritized flow over formality, volume over precision, and results over regulations. Perhaps the most shocking feat was fuel management. The Red Ball Express consumed 300,000 gallons daily just to keep trucks moving, more than entire German armies received for all operations. Yet the Americans never ran out. The secret was Operation Pluto, pipelines under the ocean, a parallel engineering miracle. By September 1944, undersea pipelines were pumping gasoline from Britain to France, completely undetected by German intelligence. Forward fuel dumps were established every 25 miles along the route. Tanker convoys ran in parallel, ensuring no truck waited more than 10 minutes to refuel. German aerial reconnaissance revealed something that terrified their planners. American fuel dumps were larger than Germany's entire strategic reserves. As one German general remarked bitterly, "They burn more gasoline moving gasoline than we allocate to entire panzer divisions." The Red Ball Express didn't just supply Patton's advance, it supercharged it. German military doctrine had long calculated that even under optimal conditions, an armored division could sustain a daily advance of 20 to 30 miles. This limit came from hard-learned experience in Poland, France, and Russia. Logistics was the leash that restrained even the fastest blitzkrieg. But by early September 1944, those assumptions were obliterated. Fueled by the Red Ball Express, Patton's divisions averaged 40 to 60 miles of advance daily, and they did it for weeks. On September 1st, the 4th Armored Division moved 35 miles in the morning, paused for a few hours while Red Ball trucks delivered fuel and ammunition, then advanced another 32 miles in the afternoon. A 67-mile advance in a single day shattered every German defensive plan. Their calculations simply didn't allow for such momentum. Field commanders struggled to form coherent defensive lines. Units arriving to block in advance found Americans already behind them. German generals initially refused to believe the reports. Heinz Guderian, father of modern armored warfare, read the intelligence from the Western Front and dismissed it as either propaganda or misidentification. No mechanized force could advance 60 miles daily for a week. It was physically impossible by their standards. Then they intercepted American radio traffic. Units were openly broadcasting their positions without encryption, confident that they could outrun German reactions. That was the moment the truth sank in. By September 5th, German intelligence had compiled a comprehensive report on the Red Ball Express. What they found was catastrophic to their strategic planning. Every assumption about American logistical limitations was wrong. Key observations in their report included: Americans waste vehicles prodigiously. They abandon broken trucks rather than repairing them. Drivers operate on stimulants for days. This violated every German personnel management principle. No camouflage discipline. The entire system should have been vulnerable to air attack, but those attacks never came. Mechanical failure rates of 30% daily. Normally a death sentence for logistics, but the Americans had overwhelming redundancy. Fuel consumption would bankrupt any European army, yet American supplies seemed infinite. Field Marshal Walter Model's reaction was telling. He concluded bitterly, "We face not a superior army, but a superior civilization. They make no effort to hide because they do not fear us. They waste because they can. We cannot defeat this with tactics." The Red Ball Express had a psychological impact that far exceeded its physical tonnage. German soldiers could hear the convoys all night, every night, an endless roar of engines moving supplies to the front. They had perhaps 3 bullets per rifle, while Americans brought in millions of rounds. For many Germans, the sound became a form of psychological warfare. It was a reminder of endless abundance, of an enemy that could deliver more supplies in a day than Germany could produce in a week. German engineers marveled at the GMC CCKW 2.5-ton truck, the workhorse of the Red Ball Express. By the end of the war, over 500,000 had been produced, more than the entire German military truck inventory combined. These trucks featured all-wheel drive as standard, automatic tire inflation systems, waterproofing for river crossings, engines that ran on low-grade fuel, cab heaters that actually worked in winter. Where Germans rebuilt engines, Americans replaced them. Where Germans hoarded spare parts, Americans scrapped entire vehicles without hesitation, and where Germans relied on master mechanics, Americans trained thousands of competent mechanics who could fix 80% of problems on the spot. As Patton advanced, the Red Ball Express adapted with breathtaking speed. When the original routes became insufficient, new ones were created almost overnight. White Ball Express, Rouen to Paris. Green Diamond, Cherbourg to railroad hubs. Red Line, Bayeux to Brussels. ABC Line, Antwerp, Brussels, Charleroi. Each new route was operational within 48 hours of conception. German staff officers, used to planning logistics changes over weeks, couldn't comprehend how the Americans could reconfigure entire supply systems in days. The predominance of African American drivers in the operation added another layer of psychological impact. Nazi ideology considered black soldiers inferior, yet these men were running a logistics miracle the German army couldn't replicate. Many German prisoners were shaken to their core when forced to work alongside African American NCOs who outperformed their engineers. The Red Ball Express was more than a convoy network. It was a mobile civilization built under fire. Behind the endless lines of trucks were thousands of engineers, mechanics, and soldiers who constructed the physical backbone of the operation at a speed that stunned even the Americans themselves. Where the Wehrmacht relied on careful planning and permanent infrastructure, the Red Ball Express thrived on rapid improvisation and industrial power. To sustain the supply flow, American engineers created infrastructure the Germans considered impossible to build under combat conditions. Built or reinforced 40 bridges, established quince major fuel depots, set up 26 maintenance stations, constructed 8 temporary truck cities along the route for rest, refueling, and repairs. One example shocked German observers more than any other. The bridge at Monty had been deliberately destroyed by retreating German engineers to halt Allied logistics. Wehrmacht calculations estimated that rebuilding it would take at least 6 weeks. The Americans did it in 14 hours. Convoys were only diverted 8 miles onto hastily bulldozed bypass roads, while combat engineers assembled a temporary structure overnight. German officers watching through binoculars were stunned. This was not the slow, methodical military engineering they understood. This was industrial improvisation in real time. German artillery units operated under strict rationing, often limited to 50 rounds per gun per day by late 1944. American forces, by contrast, fired artillery without restriction, a luxury made possible entirely by the Red Ball Express. During the reduction of the Metz fortifications in September 1944, American Corps artillery fired 100,000 rounds in just 24 hours. The Red Ball Express not only delivered every shell required, but added a 20% surplus on top. German officers calculated that such bombardments required 50 truckloads of ammunition per hour. The Americans provided it continuously, without pause and without apparent strain. This overwhelming firepower broke the back of many German defensive positions before infantry even arrived. German troops facing American artillery barrages often described the experience as being buried alive by metal. By late September 1944, the Red Ball Express was burning through vehicles at a staggering rate. Average truck lifespan, 10,000 miles versus 30,000 normally. Daily deadline rate, 30% of all vehicles. Engines replaced 500 per week. Tires, consumed. DC,000 per week. Total trucks destroyed or abandoned. Over 5,000. Any other army would have ground to a halt. But the Americans didn't slow down for a moment. Shipments of brand new trucks arrived weekly at French ports, and replacement drivers were trained in 2 days before being thrown into the convoys. German intelligence noted grimly that the Americans were destroying more trucks each week than the entire Wehrmacht had left in France, yet their transport capacity kept increasing. This was the heart of the German miscalculation. They applied European scarcity logic to an American industrial war. The US could replace machines faster than Germany could destroy them. Along the Red Ball routes, French civilians witnessed a level of abundance and speed they hadn't seen in years of German occupation. Convoys thundered past, carrying fuel, food, ammunition, soap, chocolate, cigarettes, goods that had been strictly rationed under Nazi rule. African-American drivers often shared their rations with children, tossing chocolate bars and soap at each stop despite regulations. The psychological contrast was overwhelming. German intelligence reported, French civilians now believe American victory inevitable. They cite the truck convoys as proof. Resistance activity has increased 400% along Red Ball routes. The convoys didn't just feed armies. They fueled hope and strengthened the French resistance. Every truck that rolled by was a moving billboard of Allied strength. By early September 1944, the Red Ball Express had proven unstoppable. But even unstoppable machines have limits. As Patton's Third Army pushed deeper into France, the supply lines stretched beyond their designed capacity. What followed was the greatest test of the entire operation, a full-scale logistical crisis that could have halted the Allied advance. Instead, the Americans turned the crisis into a demonstration of their unmatched ability to adapt under pressure. Patton's advance had carried his spearheads over 700 miles from the beaches, farther than even the most optimistic logistics officers had planned for. Trucks were running 20-hour days, drivers were collapsing from exhaustion, and vehicles were literally falling apart on the roads. German reconnaissance noticed the strain immediately. On September 8, 1944, a Wehrmacht panzer officer reported, American supply lines show signs of collapse. Convoy intervals have increased from 5 to 15 minutes. Vehicle speed has decreased. This is our opportunity. They were right, on paper. A less flexible logistics system would have fractured under the pressure of distance, attrition, and sheer operational tempo. But the Red Ball Express wasn't a rigid system. It was a living organism, and organisms can evolve. Within 72 hours, American logistics commanders executed a breathtaking reorganization. Key adaptations included creating intermediate transfer points to shorten individual truck runs to 350 miles, implementing driver rotation systems to fight fatigue and keep trucks rolling 24/7, establishing forward maintenance bases to repair breakdowns closer to the front, doubling the number of trucks assigned to the Red Ball network. By September 12, delivery tonnage had actually increased despite the longer distances. The Germans, expecting collapse, were stunned to discover that the Americans had absorbed the shock and become stronger. While the Red Ball Express was reorganizing on the ground, the Allies opened a new supply front in the air. Supplementing the truck convoys, the U.S. Army Air Forces began large-scale aerial resupply using C-47 transport aircraft. Each plane carried roughly 3 tons of critical supplies, ammunition, fuel, food, medical equipment, directly to forward units. On September 16, 1944, German observers counted 900 transport flights in a single day, delivering 2,700 tons of supplies by air. For comparison, the Luftwaffe, at its peak during Stalingrad, had managed 300 tons per day and considered that a maximum effort. The Americans treated aerial resupply as just another extension of their logistics network. They accepted losses, flew without fighter escort, and overwhelmed problems with sheer numbers. German analysts called this phenomenon industrial arithmetic, an equation they couldn't solve. The Americans simply had more of everything, and they moved it faster than the Germans could disrupt. One of the least appreciated strengths of the Red Ball Express was its command structure. German logistics followed strict hierarchy. Decisions flowed from the top down, often slowly. By contrast, American logistics relied on decentralized execution. Junior officers and even sergeants were empowered to make strategic-level decisions on the spot. Lieutenants rerouted convoys without waiting for permission. Sergeants improvised bypasses and maintenance fixes that would have required colonel-level approval in the Wehrmacht. If something broke, they didn't ask. They fixed or replaced it immediately. To German observers, this looked like chaotic anarchy. In reality, it was flexible control, a system designed to react faster than the enemy could adapt. As one captured officer later admitted, every American sergeant acted like a colonel. Every lieutenant acted like a general, and somehow it worked. The ultimate test came with the onset of the harsh European winter of 1944-45. German doctrine stated that wheeled logistics became impossible below 10 degrees Celsius. Snow, ice, and freezing rain turned roads into deadly traps. By all logic, the Red Ball Express should have stopped. It didn't instead. Drivers wrapped chains around their tires, poured alcohol into radiators, and kept driving through blizzards that even halted panzer divisions. Convoy speeds dropped from 35 miles per hour to around 15 miles per hour, but tonnage deliveries continued almost uninterrupted. German officers watching this unfold could scarcely believe it. They had expected weather to accomplish what their armies could not: stop the trucks. Instead, the convoys kept moving, proving that industrial logistics could defy not only strategy, but also nature itself. By the autumn of 1944, the Red Ball Express was no longer just a logistics operation. It had become a strategic weapon. German generals, who had spent their careers perfecting doctrines of maneuver and concentrated firepower, suddenly faced something they had never prepared for: an enemy whose supply system made distance irrelevant. The shock was as much psychological as it was military. It forced the German high command to confront the brutal truth that they weren't just fighting the U.S. Army, they were fighting the entire industrial might of the United States, delivered on wheels at 35 miles per hour. By early September, German intelligence had compiled a series of detailed reports on the Red Ball Express. What they found shattered decades of assumptions about modern warfare. The key conclusions were alarming. The Americans have created a supply system that nullifies distance. Their culminating point, the moment an advancing army outruns its supplies, does not exist. They replace vehicles faster than we can destroy them. We lack the aircraft to interdict their convoys effectively. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Supreme Commander West, studied these reports for hours. On September 15, 1944, he summoned his staff and announced grimly, "Gentlemen, we face something beyond military solution. The Americans have revolutionized warfare, and we are fighting the last war. His operations officer suggested launching Luftwaffe strikes against the Red Ball routes. Rundstedt-Sepp's response was coldly rational. With what shall we interdict? They have 6,000 trucks. If we destroy 1,000, they replace them in a week. We would need to destroy 200 trucks daily just to match their production. We don't have 200 aircraft total. The German strategic position had quietly shifted from defense against an army to desperation against an industrial tide. Behind the tonnage tables and vehicle statistics were the thousands of men who made the Red Ball Express possible. German observers were astonished by their endurance and initiative. They reported instances of drivers refusing relief after 72 hours without sleep because their trucks were needed at the front. Mechanics working knee-deep in freezing mud through the night to keep convoys rolling. Teenagers lying about their age to enlist as drivers. This wasn't a faceless machine. It was individual determination scaled up to industrial levels. German soldiers along the front could hear the constant rumble of engines at night. Some began reporting ghost convoys, phantom sounds of trucks that weren't actually there, evidence of the psychological damage the endless American supply flow had inflicted. The sound of engines became a propaganda weapon. Allied psychological warfare units even broadcast recordings of truck convoys toward German lines when real convoys weren't nearby. German units frequently reported these phantom convoys as real, their nerves worn thin by the constant reminder of Allied abundance. By October 1944, as advancing railheads began to take over part of the burden, German commanders finally grasped the strategic magnitude of what they were witnessing. Field Marshal Walter Modelsipp's final report summarized the situation succinctly. We were not defeated primarily by American tanks or aircraft. We were defeated by American trucks. The Red Ball Express wasn't elegant. It wasn't efficient by traditional military standards, but it was fast, massive, and relentless, and that made it decisive. The Germans had expected Allied offensives to slow once they outran their initial supply depots, just as German blitzkrieg had stalled on the Eastern Front. Instead, the Americans extended their operational reach indefinitely. This destroyed German defensive timetables, made fixed fortifications obsolete, and forced the Wehrmacht into a constant, exhausting retreat. There was another shock embedded within this logistics miracle: the racial composition of its drivers. Around 75% of the Red Ball Express drivers were African American soldiers operating in a still segregated U.S. Army. For German racial theorists, this was a devastating contradiction. Nazi ideology considered black people inferior, incapable of technical or disciplined work. Yet these men were sustaining the most ambitious logistics operation in military history, and doing it flawlessly. Captured German officers later admitted their worldview was shaken. Some were forced to work alongside African American non-commissioned officers whose calculated weight distributions faster than German engineers, spoke better English than German instructors, treated POWs fairly despite Nazi propaganda portraying them otherwise. These encounters created cognitive dissonance within the German military mindset, as one POW later admitted. Every mile they drove proved Hitler wrong. Even nature couldn't stop the Red Ball Express. As winter set in, the Americans simply adapted. Convoys slowed, but never stopped. Bridges and roads were repaired faster than weather or sabotage could damage them. German officers, trained to see logistics as fragile and vulnerable, were forced to accept that American logistics operated on different physical principles, not because of magic, but because of scale and preparation. The United States had built a logistics machine that could absorb damage, weather, waste, and inefficiency, and keep accelerating. When the Red Ball Express began in late August 1944, it was conceived as a temporary emergency measure, a way to bridge the gap between Normandy's beaches and the rapidly advancing front. It was supposed to last 10 days. Instead, it ran for 82 days, delivered over 412,000 tons of supplies, and permanently rewrote the rulebook of modern warfare. Its legacy extended far beyond the liberation of France. It changed logistics, strategy, psychology, and even post-war industry. By October 1944, advancing Allied railheads finally began to catch up with the front lines. Rail transport, with its greater capacity and efficiency, gradually replaced the truck convoys for long-distance supply. But even this transition was a marvel. While the Red Ball Express was still operating, American railroad engineers were rebuilding French railways at record speed. 1,000 miles of destroyed track reconstructed, captured German locomotives and rolling stock pressed into service. Bridges and stations restored faster than the Germans could sabotage them. When the Red Ball Express officially shut down on November 16, 1944, the shift happened almost overnight. Troops were reassigned, vehicles redistributed, temporary depots dismantled. A logistical operation involving 23,000 men and 6,000 vehicles disappeared in 72 hours, a feat that took German forces months or even years to accomplish on a smaller scale. The numbers tell the story better than any propaganda could. Over its operational lifetime, the Red Ball Express achieved 82 days of continuous operation, 412,193 tons of supplies delivered, 122 million ton-miles covered, 5,958 vehicles, daily average 7,000 at peak, 23,000 drivers employed, 57 million gallons of fuel consumed, 180,000 tires worn out, 5,000 plus vehicles destroyed or abandoned, $100 million cost $1944, 47 German divisions defeated through supply advantage. War shortened by an estimated 180 days. For German officers reviewing these figures in captivity, the shock was profound. They had based their logistics assumptions on European precedent, multiplying their own best performance by 3 and assuming that would be the American limit. They were wrong by a factor of 10. The Red Ball Express proved that in modern war, logistics doesn't support strategy. Logistics is strategy. American planners didn't just keep up with the pace of combat, they set the pace. German generals who had mocked American inefficiency realized too late that what they were witnessing wasn't inefficiency. It was industrial abundance used as a weapon. The key lessons were clear. Volume overcomes inefficiency. Redundancy eliminates vulnerability. Decentralized execution enables speed. Standardization multiplies capability. Human endurance is higher than assumed. These principles became the foundation of modern military logistics. Armies around the world studied the Red Ball Express after the war, and its influence can be seen in every major operation since. The Red Ball Express also forced the U.S. military to confront its own contradictions. The operation depended overwhelmingly on African American soldiers who were still segregated, often denied equal rights, and barred from combat roles. General Eisenhower himself witnessed their contribution firsthand during a visit in September 1944. These men are winning the war as surely as any infantry. Their performance helped build the moral and political momentum that led to military desegregation in 1948. African American drivers, mechanics, and soldiers had proven through sheer skill and determination that they were as capable as anyone, often more so. When the war ended, thousands of Red Ball veterans returned home with unparalleled experience in high-volume, high-speed transportation networks. Many of them went on to found or shape the post-war American trucking industry. Companies such as Yellow Freight, Roadway, and Consolidated Freightways were started or influenced by these veterans. They applied wartime lessons to peacetime commerce. Volume beats perfection. Speed beats efficiency. 24-hour operations changed the game. These ideas became the backbone of the interstate highway system and the modern logistics sector, transforming how goods move across continents. For decades, the Red Ball Express was overshadowed by dramatic combat operations like D-Day, Market Garden, and the Battle of the Bulge. But in 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the U.S. Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp honoring the Red Ball Express. At the National Postal Museum in Washington, D.C., veterans gathered to remember their role. Many of them were black soldiers who had driven through exhaustion, danger, and discrimination to keep Patton's tanks moving. They hadn't worn medals or led charges, but their contribution had been decisive. As one veteran said at the ceremony, "We didn't set fire the guns, but without us, the guns didn't set fire." The German generals who laughed at American logistics in August 1944 signed their surrender papers 9 months later, defeated not just by tanks and bombers, but by 23,000 truck drivers and a river of supplies. They had prepared for tanks, planes, and ships. They had never prepared for trucks. One captured German officer watching the endless convoys in Belgium summarized it perfectly. "We prepared for everything. Your tanks, your planes, your ships. We never prepared for your trucks. How do you defeat an enemy who has more trucks than you have soldiers?" The Red Ball Express turned logistics into a decisive instrument of war. It proved that industrial power, organized and unleashed, could defeat even the most experienced military machine. It was loud, wasteful, improvised, and often chaotic, but it worked spectacularly. The roar of the convoys eventually faded from the roads of France, but the impact of the Red Ball Express echoed far beyond the autumn of 1944. What began as an improvised logistical gamble became the model for modern military supply chains. It proved, beyond doubt, that speed and volume can defeat even the most sophisticated battlefield tactics. When the operation ended on November 16, 1944, the highways were cleared, the trucks redistributed, and the drivers reassigned. In just 72 hours, an operation that had sustained an entire army simply vanished. This speed of deployment and dissolution was unheard of in German military tradition, which was based on permanent, slow-moving infrastructure. The Americans had shown the world that logistics didn't need to be permanent to be powerful. It just needed to be overwhelming, fast, and flexible. In post-war military academies, from West Point to Sandhurst, the Red Ball Express became a case study in logistics strategy. It changed doctrine permanently. No longer was supply considered a support role, it was recognized as a primary instrument of warfare. The men who drove those trucks didn't simply return home, they took their experience with them. Thousands of veterans of the Red Ball Express became the backbone of the modern American trucking industry. They had learned how to keep vehicles moving 24 hours a day, how to manage routes without centralized control, and how to improvise repairs on the fly. In the late 1940s and 1950s, these veterans founded companies that would define American logistics: Yellow Freight, Roadway, Consolidated Freightways, and many more. Their wartime experience directly inspired the interstate highway system, built in the 1950s, which mirrored the principles of the Red Ball Express: fast, high-volume, one-direction priority routes. In the Cold War, military planners adapted Red Ball tactics for nuclear-era mobility. The same principles powered the massive convoys that kept NATO supplied across Europe. Later, during Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm, the U.S. military used rolling pipeline convoys in Saudi Arabia. Almost identical in concept to Red Ball, to move fuel, ammunition, and food across hundreds of miles of desert. Even civilian giants like FedEx, UPS, and Amazon rely on logistics strategies pioneered in 1944: decentralized control, round-the-clock movement, and prioritization of volume over efficiency. The DNA of Red Ball lives in every overnight delivery truck on a modern highway. Beneath the statistics and strategic brilliance were the human stories. The drivers of the Red Ball Express, most of them young and black, built a culture of resilience and defiance on the road. They painted bold slogans on their trucks. Hitler, here we come. Pitt and Sip's Blood Bank. Detroit to Berlin Express. They developed their own traffic rules. Slower vehicles pulled off immediately, broken-down trucks were shoved into ditches. Anyone driving under 20 miles per hour was a rolling roadblock. Convoys didn't stop, not for darkness, not for fog, not for enemy aircraft. They drove with headlights blazing, defying every German doctrine about concealment. The work was brutal. Many drivers operated for 72 hours straight, surviving on coffee and Benzedrine tablets. Accidents were frequent. Trucks rolled into ditches, collided in the fog, or caught fire. Over 300 drivers were killed during the operation, yet morale remained astonishingly high. They understood the stakes. They were driving history forward. For African American soldiers, the Red Ball Express became more than a mission. It was a statement. In a segregated army that denied them combat roles, they became the backbone of victory. Every mile driven was a direct challenge to Nazi racial ideology and to America's own discrimination. To close, it's a clean chronological timeline of the Red Ball Express. August 19th, 1944. German High Command predicts Patton will stall from lack of fuel. August 25th, 1944. Lieutenant Colonel Loren Ayres proposes a non-stop truck convoy highway, the Red Ball Express. August 26th, 1944. Operation begins. Convoys roll with headlights on, defying doctrine. August 28th, 1944. German reconnaissance spots continuous vehicle columns, 1000+ per hour. Panic sets in. Early September, Red Ball Express reaches peak speed and volume, 12,000+ tons daily delivered. Mid-September, crisis, as distances exceed 700 miles. System is reorganized and expanded. Tonnage increases. September 16th, 1944. 900 aerial supply flights supplement convoys, a logistics feat Germans can't match. Nahtmordiba the Mary Spar rail lines advance, reducing truck dependency. Operation continues at high tempo. November 16th, 1944. Red Ball Express officially ends after 82 days. Total impact, 412,000+ tons delivered, 122 million ton miles, 47 German divisions crushed through supply superiority. They were not generals, not tank aces, not famous heroes. They were 23,000 drivers, most of them young, black, and uncelebrated. But they kept the engines roaring. They turned logistics into strategy, and they changed the course of the war. Amateurs talk tactics. Professionals talk logistics. But in 1944, America talked trucks,